7-year-old Leo Sullivan vanished from Niagara Falls on August 12, 1980. One moment, he was a flash of red t-shirt and boundless energy, a little boy mesmerized by the thunderous power of nature. The next, he was gone. He didn't scream. He didn't leave a trail. He simply dissolved into the mist and the roar of the water, becoming a ghost story whispered on the wind. For 25 years, his disappearance was a wound that never closed, an absolute mystery that defied every investigator, every searcher, and every prayer. The case was a monument to the unknown, a cold file gathering dust in a forgotten cabinet. 25 years later, in the spring of 2005, a geological stabilization project sent a cascade of ancient rock tumbling into the Niagara Gorge. As a lone construction worker began clearing the debris, his excavator bucket struck something small, metallic, and completely out of place. He climbed down from his cab, expecting nothing more than discarded junk. But what he unearthed that day would not only solve the riddle of the boy who disappeared into the mist, it would expose a dark secret that had been buried for a generation, proving that the most terrifying monsters are not the ones in stories, but the ones who walk among us. Leo Sullivan was a cartographer of small worlds. His bedroom wasn't just a room. It was a charted territory. Hand-drawn maps were thumbtacked to the walls, detailing the treacherous Couch Mountains, the kitchen table plateau, and the vast, unexplored wilderness of the backyard. His greatest treasure was a simple brass compass, a gift from his grandfather, which he wore on a leather cord around his neck at all times. He was a boy who believed in order, in finding the way, which made his eventual vanishing all the more cruelly ironic. He was the only child of Michael and Sarah Sullivan, a soft-spoken architect and a vibrant elementary school teacher who saw the world in their son. Michael taught him how to read blueprints and build impossible structures with Legos, while Sarah filled his head with tales of ancient explorers and distant galaxies. Their life in a quiet Buffalo suburb was idyllic, defined by weekend trips to the library, pancake breakfasts, and the comforting rhythm of a family deeply in love. Leo wasn't just their son. He was their shared project, their masterpiece. He was shy with strangers but fiercely loyal to his friends and family, with a quiet determination that adults often mistook for daydreaming. In reality, he was observing, cataloging, and memorizing the world around him. His core ambition, at the tender age of 7, was to become a park ranger. He wanted to wear the flat-brimmed hat, protect the forests, and know every trail and secret path. The trip to Niagara Falls in August of 1980 was the highlight of his young life, a pilgrimage to the heart of the nature he so adored. For his parents, it was a chance to see that wonder reflected in his eyes. They had saved for months, planning every detail to make it perfect. They packed his favorite snacks, his sketchbook for drawing the waterfalls, and his beloved red metal lunchbox decorated with images of astronauts. Inside that lunchbox, alongside a peanut butter sandwich, was his most recent map, a carefully rendered drawing of the Niagara Falls State Park, with a big gold star marking the spot where they would have their picnic. The emotional stakes were simple, yet profound. It was the universe of a happy, hopeful family, a small, perfect world built on love and routine. The life that was about to be interrupted was not just one of an adventurous little boy. It was the entire future of the Sullivan family. It was every birthday Leo would never celebrate, every school play he would never star in, every hug Michael and Sarah would never get to give. In the days before the trip, Leo had been practicing with his compass in the backyard, proudly showing his father how he could always find north. "I can't get lost, Dad," he'd said with the unshakable confidence of a 7-year-old. "I have my compass." Those words would become a haunting refrain, a cruel echo in the silent years that followed, a testament to the life that was, and the profound, aching emptiness of the life that was stolen. The morning of August 12th dawned bright and hazy, the air already thick with the promise of late summer heat. The Sullivans arrived at Niagara Falls just after 9 a.m., the roar of the water a physical presence that vibrated in their chests. Leo was electric, his eyes wide as he took in the sheer scale of the Horseshoe Falls. He gripped his father's hand tightly, pointing at the tour boats plowing through the churning basin below. "Can we go on one, Dad? Can we?" he pleaded. Michael laughed, ruffling his son's sandy hair. "That's the plan, Ranger Leo. First, the Maid of the Mist." They donned the blue plastic ponchos which dwarfed Leo's small frame and joined the queue of tourists. On the boat, pressed against the railing, the spray was cold and exhilarating. Leo's face, peeking out from his oversized hood, was a portrait of pure joy. He kept one hand firmly on the compass around his neck, as if to ground himself in the magnificent chaos. After the boat ride, they walked the winding paths of the park on the American side. The crowds were immense, a slow-moving river of people from all over the world. Several times, Sarah had to pull Leo back from the edge of the crowd, his curiosity pulling him forward. "Stay close, sweetie," she'd murmur, her voice tight with the low-grade anxiety every parent feels in a bustling public place. He would nod dutifully, but his attention was a butterfly, flitting from a brightly colored kite to the antics of a squirrel, to the intricate patterns in the stone railings. For lunch, they found a relatively quiet patch of grass on a bluff overlooking the Niagara Falls, away from the main tourist thoroughfares. It was a spot Michael had scouted on a map, promising a spectacular view without the crush of people. As Sarah laid out the blanket and opened the picnic basket, Leo took out his red metal lunchbox. He sat cross-legged, munching on his sandwich while sketching the falls in his notepad. A park maintenance worker in a plain green uniform ambled by, nodding a silent greeting. A family from Germany asked Michael to take their picture. These were the insignificant details, the background noise of a perfect day. After eating, Leo announced he was going on a short expedition to the edge of the nearby woods just 50 feet away. "I'm going to find a special rock," he declared. Michael watched him go. "Don't go too far, Leo. I can see you from here," he called out. Leo gave a thumbs up and disappeared behind a large oak tree. Those were the last words he would ever speak to his son. The minutes stretched. Michael and Sarah packed up the remnants of their lunch, folding the blanket, their conversation light and easy. It was only when Michael stood up, ready to call Leo back, that a sliver of unease crept in. The spot by the woods was empty. "Leo," he called, his voice casual at first. No answer. "Leo," he called again, louder this time, a new urgency in his tone. Sarah was on her feet now, her hand flying to her mouth. They walked quickly to the tree line, their calls growing more frantic. But there was only the rustle of leaves and the ceaseless, indifferent roar of the falls. He was gone. It was a fatal mistake, a moment of lapsed attention that would create a legend and shatter their world. The first wave of panic was a physical blow, a cold dread that seized Michael's chest and stole his breath. He was right there, he stammered, his eyes scanning the woods, the bluff, the path. He was just right there. Sarah was already running, her voice a high, piercing cry of "Leo, Leo," that was swallowed by the ambient thunder of the water. The serene picnic spot transformed into a scene of primal fear. The checkered blanket lay askew. A half-eaten apple sat browning on a paper plate, and near the base of the old oak tree, where Leo had last been seen, sat his small sketchbook, flipped open to his drawing of the falls. Beside it was a single, perfect maple leaf he must have just picked up. But there was no sign of Leo himself, no footprints on the soft earth leading into the woods, no scuff marks, no sound of a crying child. It was as if the ground had opened up and swallowed him whole. Michael's mind raced, cycling through impossible scenarios. Did he fall? He sprinted to the edge of the bluff, his heart hammering against his ribs as he peered over the low stone barrier. Below, the gorge dropped away into a maelstrom of rock and churning water. There was nothing, no flash of red, no sign of a tragic accident, just the raw, terrifying power of the river. The initial confusion gave way to a frantic, disorganized search. Michael ran one way along the path, Sarah the other, their voices raw from shouting his name. Tourists stopped to stare, their own vacation bliss punctured by the Sullivans' rising terror. A park ranger on a bicycle was the first official to arrive, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to Michael's frantic explanations. The ranger's radio crackled to life, turning a private nightmare into a public emergency. Within minutes, the area was swarming with Niagara Park's police. The Sullivans were separated, asked the same questions over and over. When did you last see him? What was he wearing? Did he have any tendency to wander? Sarah could barely speak through her sobs, while Michael's voice was a strained, cracking whisper. The 911 call logged at 1:47 p.m. captured the sheer desperation. The operator's calm, procedural questions were met with Michael's ragged breaths and choked pleas. My 7-year-old son is gone. We're at Niagara Falls, by the, a picnic area near the American Falls. His name is Leo. He's wearing a red shirt and blue shorts. Please, you have to find him. The most chilling clue was the one that wasn't there. Leo's compass, the one he never took off, was gone. But his brand new toy dump truck, the one he had been so excited to play with, was left behind, sitting in the grass near their blanket. A child who wandered off to explore would have taken his compass. A child in distress might have dropped his toy. But this scene felt wrong, staged. It was too quiet, too neat. The absence of struggle was more terrifying than any sign of violence. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the park, the initial hope curdled into a cold, sickening certainty. This was not a simple case of a lost child. Something terrible had happened. The formal search for Leo Sullivan began as a textbook operation and descended into a case study of frustration and failure. Within an hour of the 911 call, the Niagara Frontier region was galvanized. The Niagara Parks Police established a command post near Terrapin Point, its flashing lights a beacon of grim activity. They were quickly joined by the New York State Police, local sheriff's departments, and legions of volunteers, firefighters, off-duty cops, and ordinary citizens who abandoned their plans to help find the missing boy. The initial search grid was massive, covering miles of parkland, dense woods, and the treacherous gorge itself. Search dogs were brought in, their excited barks quickly turning to confused whimpers. They would follow Leo's scent from the picnic blanket to the edge of the woods. And then, nothing. The trail went cold, abruptly, and completely, as if Leo had been lifted into the air. This anomaly baffled the handlers and became the first of many dead ends. The external conflicts began almost immediately. The sheer number of tourists created a contamination nightmare. Thousands of people had walked those same paths, their scents and footprints overwhelming any trace Leo might have left. The search managers' pleas to clear the area were met with bureaucratic resistance. Shutting down one of the world's premier tourist attractions was a logistical and financial impossibility. The family's desperation grew with each passing hour. Michael and Sarah were sequestered in a small, sterile room at the park police headquarters, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. They watched the search unfold on a small television, feeling utterly helpless. Michael, an architect used to precision and control, found himself unable to do anything but wait. He demanded to join the search, to walk the woods himself, but was gently but firmly denied. "You need to be here in case we get a call," an officer told him, a well-meaning but agonizing instruction. Then the weather turned. On the evening of the second day, a violent thunderstorm, characteristic of the Great Lakes region in late summer, rolled in with breathtaking speed. Lightning illuminated the churning river, and torrential rain turned the search area into a quagmire of mud and slick rock. The search was called off. The helicopters were grounded. The dogs were useless in the downpour. For 12 critical hours, the effort came to a complete standstill. It felt like nature itself was conspiring against them. Tragedy struck on day 3. A New York State Police helicopter, maneuvering low over the gorge to get a better view of the riverbanks, was caught in a sudden, violent downdraft. The pilot fought for control, but the main rotor clipped the cliff face. The resulting crash was catastrophic, killing both the pilot and the spotter. The search for a missing boy had now become a recovery mission for 2 fallen officers. The resources, the media attention, the emotional focus of the entire operation shifted. The search for Leo continued, but it was overshadowed, its momentum broken. Investigators pursued every lead with diligence, but they were chasing ghosts. A tourist thought she saw a boy matching Leo's description getting into a blue sedan, but the lead went nowhere. Another witness remembered a man arguing with a child near the restrooms, but the timeline didn't match. The failure was not one of effort, but of circumstance. The perfect storm of a contaminated scene, horrific weather, and a tragic accident created an impenetrable wall. The methodologies were sound. Grid searches, canine units, aerial reconnaissance, witness canvassing. But they were all predicated on finding a boy who had wandered off or met with an accident in the park. The search failed because it was based on a false premise. Leo Sullivan hadn't simply been lost in the woods or swept away by the river. He had been erased. The official search was scaled back after 2 weeks, then officially suspended after a month. The command post was dismantled, the volunteers went home, and the media moved on to the next tragedy. For the world, the story of Leo Sullivan was over. For his parents, the silence that followed was a living torture. The case went cold, but the pain remained white-hot. The first few years were a blur of false hope and crushing disappointment. Every time a child's remains were found anywhere in the Northeast, Michael and Sarah would endure the agonizing wait for identification, a grotesque cycle of dread and a strange, hollow relief when it wasn't him. Their home, once a vibrant hub of family life, became a quiet, somber museum. Leo's room was left untouched, the hand-drawn map still on the wall, his Lego creations frozen mid-construction. It was a shrine to a ghost, a daily reminder of their catastrophic loss. The strain was immense. Michael retreated into his work, burying his grief in blueprints and building models, structures he could control. Sarah, a woman who had dedicated her life to children, could no longer bear to be in a classroom. She quit her job, becoming a recluse in her own home, her world shrinking to the size of her grief. Their shared loss, which should have bound them together, became a chasm between them. They rarely spoke of Leo, the subject too painful, yet his absence filled every silence. Over time, Leo Sullivan's story seeped into the local folklore of Niagara Falls. He became a cautionary tale for parents, a ghost story for teenagers. He was the boy in the mist, the child who was claimed by the angry spirits of the falls. Tour guides would sometimes point vaguely towards the woods on the American side and lower their voices, telling the dramatic, tragic tale of the 7-year-old who vanished without a trace. His name became a grim landmark, as much a part of the local lore as the daredevils who went over the falls in barrels. For the Sullivan family, this transformation of their personal tragedy into a public spectacle was a unique form of torment. They were no longer just a grieving family. They were the keepers of a local legend. On the 10th anniversary of his disappearance, a local newspaper ran a retrospective piece. It featured a picture of Leo, smiling and vibrant, next to a recent photo of Michael and Sarah, their faces etched with a decade of sorrow. The article rehashed the failed search, the helicopter crash, and the enduring mystery. It cemented the case as one of the region's great unsolved tragedies, a permanent question mark. The years bled into one another. The world moved on. A new generation of children came to marvel at the falls, unaware of the ghost story that clung to the place. Michael and Sarah grew older, their hair turning gray, their hope dwindling to a faint, stubborn ember. They never moved away. They stayed in the same house, waiting for a knock on the door that would never come. The feeling of hopelessness was a physical weight, a constant pressure on their chests. Leo was frozen in time as a 7-year-old boy, while they were forced to live out the long, empty years he was denied. The mystery of what happened on that August day had become a permanent part of their identity, a shadow from which they could never escape. For 25 years, the case of Leo Sullivan lay dormant, a fossil embedded in the cold, hard rock of unsolved files. The truth of his disappearance seemed as inaccessible as the bottom of the Niagara Gorge. Then, in April of 2005, the catalyst for its resolution came not from a detective's hunch or a new piece of evidence, but from the deliberate, thunderous roar of a controlled rockslide. The Niagara Parks Commission had initiated a large-scale geological stabilization project to shore up a section of the gorge wall on the American side, an area that had been slowly eroding for decades. The project involved carefully planned blasting to remove loose and unstable rock formations. On a Tuesday morning, demolition experts triggered a blast that sent thousands of tons of rock and earth crashing down into the gorge below. The event was routine, a matter of engineering and safety. But it was this act that would dislodge a secret held for a quarter of a century. The day after the blast, a crew from a private construction firm was brought in to begin the arduous task of clearing the debris and reinforcing the newly exposed cliff face. A man named Dave Markowicz, a veteran heavy equipment operator with 30 years of experience, was maneuvering his excavator at the base of the rock pile. For hours, his work was monotonous, scooping up shattered limestone and dirt and loading it into dump trucks. It was just another job. Around noon, as he swung the machine's heavy steel bucket into a mound of freshly disturbed earth, he felt a jarring thud. It wasn't the dull crunch of rock. It was a sharp, metallic clang. Thinking he'd hit a piece of old rebar or some other construction debris, he carefully used the bucket to scrape away the dirt. What he uncovered was not junk. It was a small, rectangular object, its original color obscured by a thick cake of rust and grime. It was a child's lunchbox. Dave shut down the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the ever-present roar of the falls. He climbed down from the cab, his curiosity piqued. The lunchbox was wedged tightly between two rocks, clearly having been buried for a very long time. It was dented and corroded, but remarkably intact. With some effort, he pried it loose. The clasp was rusted shut. Using a pry bar from his toolkit, he forced it open. The hiss of air escaping the sealed container was audible. Inside, miraculously preserved from the elements, were the contents: a small, brittle thermos, a Ziploc bag containing the fossilized remains of a sandwich, and nestled at the bottom, a folded piece of paper. Dave carefully unfolded the drawing. It was unmistakably a child's work, rendered in crayon. It depicted a smiling stick figure family next to a huge blue waterfall, but it was the other object that made the hairs on his arms stand up. It was a small, tarnished brass compass, still hanging on a frayed leather cord. He knew the local legends. He had grown up in the area. He knew the story of the boy in the mist. This was the pivotal moment, the twist of fate that decades of police work could never achieve. The discovery wasn't just a piece of old trash. It was a voice from the past, screaming a clue that had been silenced for 25 years. The discovery of the rusted lunchbox ignited a firestorm. Dave Markowicz immediately contacted his foreman, who in turn called the Niagara Parks Police. Within an hour, the construction site was a crime scene, cordoned off with yellow tape for the first time in 25 years. The news sent a shockwave through the old guard of the New York State Police. Detective Frank Rizzo, a grizzled veteran just a few years from retirement, had been a rookie patrolman assigned to crowd control during the original search for Leo Sullivan. The case had haunted him his entire career. He personally drove to the site, taking possession of the lunchbox and its contents as if they were the Holy Grail. The items were sent directly to the State Forensic Lab in Albany. The first confirmation came quickly. The thermos and lunchbox were a specific model sold between 1978 and 1981. More importantly, the compass was unique, a vintage LL Bean model with a tiny, almost invisible scratch on the glass casing. Michael and Sarah Sullivan, now in their late 60s, were contacted. Through tears, Michael described the compass he had given his son, including the small scratch he'd made when he dropped it on the garage floor a week before the trip. It was a perfect match. For the first time in 25 years, they had proof. Leo had been at that spot. But the drawing held the key that would blow the case wide open. Under high-resolution scanning, a detail emerged in the background that everyone had missed. Behind the stick figure family, next to the crayon waterfall, Leo had drawn a man. The man wasn't a tourist. He was wearing a specific uniform, a brown shirt and pants with a distinct circular logo on the sleeve, and he was standing next to a white van, also bearing the logo. This was the bombshell. Detective Rizzo knew the park maintenance uniform was green. This was something else entirely. He launched a frantic search through the park's decades-old archives, looking for records of outside contractors from 1980. After days of digging through dusty boxes, he found it. A short-term contract for pest control services awarded to a small local company called Gorge Maintenance Solutions. Their uniform was brown. Their logo was a circle. The company had gone out of business in 1985. The next step was a painstaking search for former employees. Using old tax records and Social Security data, Rizzo and his team began building a list. Most were dead or had moved away, but one name stood out: Arthur Finch, a man who still lived in a small house just a few miles from the park. His employment record showed he was on duty at the park on August 12, 1980. Rizzo and a young, determined detective named Maria Chen drove to Finch's house. They found an irritable, reclusive man in his late 70s. When they showed him a photo of Leo Sullivan, he feigned ignorance. But when Detective Chen produced the enhanced image of the child's drawing, the man in the brown uniform, Finch's composure cracked. His face went pale. His hands began to tremble. "It was an accident," he stammered, his voice thin and reedy. "We didn't mean for it to happen." The confession tumbled out, a torrent of words held back for a quarter of a century. Finch wasn't a pest control worker. Gorge Maintenance Solutions was a front for a small-time smuggling ring. He and a partner, the company's owner, used the service tunnels and hidden crevices of the gorge to move stolen high-end electronics from Canada into the U.S., bypassing customs. On that August day, they were transferring a shipment near the very bluff where the Sullivans were having their picnic. They thought the area was deserted. But little Leo, on his expedition, had wandered further than his father realized. He had his compass and was trying to map the woods. He stumbled out of the trees and saw them. Two men pulling boxes out of a hidden panel in the rock face. The boy didn't scream. He just stood there, watching, his eyes wide with a child's unfiltered curiosity. Finch and his partner panicked. They were career criminals with long rap sheets. A witness, especially a child who could draw what he saw with unnerving accuracy, would ruin them. They couldn't let him go, so they grabbed him. Finch's partner clamped a hand over the boy's mouth. Leo dropped his lunchbox in the struggle. They dragged him to their van, parked in a service area just out of sight. The central question, what happened to Leo Sullivan, was finally answered. He hadn't fallen, he hadn't been swept away, he had been kidnapped. But the revelation that followed was even more stunning. "We didn't kill him," Finch insisted, tears welling in his eyes. "I wouldn't. I couldn't do that. My partner, he knew people. People who could make a kid disappear. The solution wasn't an ending. It was a new, desperate beginning." The confession of Arthur Finch transformed the cold case into a live, multi-agency investigation. Finch was immediately taken into custody, his house swarming with state police. The details he provided were chilling in their cold, calculated logic. His partner and the ringleader of the operation, a man named Thomas Prewitt, was the one who made the call. Prewitt, as it turned out, had died of a heart attack in 1999, taking many of his secrets to the grave. But Finch's testimony was enough to reconstruct the conspiracy. The why was a toxic cocktail of greed and panic. The smuggling operation was their livelihood, a source of untaxed cash that funded their lives. Leo, the innocent witness, represented an existential threat. Killing him felt too risky, too messy. Prewitt, a man with connections to a much darker underworld, proposed a different solution, one he considered cleaner. He knew a couple in Montreal, part of an illicit network that specialized in black market adoptions. They were essentially human traffickers, providing children to wealthy, desperate couples who couldn't adopt through legal channels. The plan was terrifyingly simple. They drove Leo, sedated and confused, across the border at a quiet checkpoint, hidden in a secret compartment in their van. In a sterile motel room outside Montreal, they handed the 7-year-old boy over to a woman he had never seen before. They were paid $20,000. For Finch and Prewitt, it was a business transaction. They had solved their problem. They returned to their lives, sold their front company a few years later, and buried the secret so deep they almost convinced themselves it never happened. The lunchbox, dropped in the panic, had been kicked into a crevice and buried by natural erosion, a time capsule of their crime, only to be unearthed by the deliberate rockslide decades later. The revelation sent investigators scrambling. The immediate aftermath was a flurry of international cooperation. The FBI and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police joined forces, using Finch's fragmented memories of the Montreal connection to open a new front in the investigation. They focused on illegal adoption rings operating in Quebec in the early 1980s. It was a painstaking process, chasing down phantom names and long-dead leads. The story became an international sensation. The boy in the mist hadn't died. He had been sold. For Michael and Sarah Sullivan, the news was a second earthquake. The grief they had learned to live with was replaced by a bewildering, agonizing storm of new emotions. Their son was alive, but he had been raised by strangers, by criminals. The 25 years of not knowing were suddenly filled with horrific imaginings of the life he must have lived. Was he safe? Was he loved? Did he even know he was a Sullivan? The investigation zeroed in on a specific couple known to the RCMP for other criminal activities who had suddenly, and without any official record, acquired a young son around 1980. They were now deceased, but their son, a man living in Toronto under the name Daniel Miller, was very much alive. He was a 32-year-old graphic designer, married, with a child of his own. The final pieces fell into place. The investigators approached him cautiously. They asked for a voluntary DNA sample. The results came back a week later. It was a 99.99% match to Michael and Sarah Sullivan. Daniel Miller was Leo Sullivan. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning. Detective Rizzo's voice was gentle, measured. "Michael, Sarah, we found him. We found Leo. He's alive." For a long moment, there was only silence on the line, the sound of two parents trying to process a miracle that felt more like a dream. Relief washed over them, so powerful it was physically painful, a wave that threatened to drown them. It was followed instantly by a profound, gut-wrenching grief for the 25 years that had been stolen. Their son was a stranger. He had a different name, a different life, a different family. The reunion was arranged to take place in a quiet, private room at the Canadian consulate in Toronto. Michael and Sarah walked in, their hands trembling. Across the room stood a man with sandy hair and familiar blue eyes, the ghost of their son housed in the body of an adult. This man, Daniel, looked at them with a polite confusion, not recognition. He had been told his entire life that his birth parents had died in a car crash. The people who raised him were the only parents he had ever known. The meeting was awkward, beautiful, and heartbreaking. Sarah pulled out a small, worn photograph of a 7-year-old Leo, beaming in his Ranger wannabe outfit. Daniel stared at the photo, a flicker of something distant in his eyes. He had no conscious memory of that boy, but the image resonated on a deeper, cellular level. Michael, a man who had walled off his heart for decades, simply wept. He couldn't speak. He just looked at his son, tracing the lines of a face that was both familiar and entirely new. The resolution was not a Hollywood ending where everyone embraced and lived happily ever after. It was the beginning of a long, complicated journey. Leo, or Daniel, as he still preferred to be called, had to reconcile the fact that his entire life was a lie. He had to mourn the parents he thought he had, while getting to know the parents he had lost. For Michael and Sarah, the relief was immense, but it was inextricably mixed with the pain of what could have been. They had missed his childhood, his adolescence, his wedding. They were grandparents to a child they had never met. Yet, in the quiet moments, there were glimmers of connection. Daniel had a habit of sketching buildings, an echo of the architect father he never knew. He was meticulously organized, a trait inherited from his map-making younger self. These small threads began to stitch together the torn fabric of their family. The human element of this story was found in these fragile, tentative moments. A shared cup of coffee, the exchanging of old photographs, the slow, cautious process of becoming family again. There was no erasing the 25 years of silence, but for the first time, there was a future. The ghost of the boy in the mist was finally laid to rest, replaced by a man learning to answer to the name Leo Sullivan. The incredible story of Leo Sullivan became more than just a solved case. It became a powerful lesson in the duality of human nature. It showcased the depths of human evil, the casual cruelty of men who would steal a child to protect a petty criminal enterprise. Arthur Finch and Thomas Pruitt's actions were a testament to a chilling moral calculus where a boy's life was worth less than their freedom. Their crime was not one of passion, but of cold, selfish convenience. Yet standing in stark opposition to that darkness was the profound power of a family's undying love and the unexpected compassion of a stranger. For 25 years, Michael and Sarah Sullivan never gave up hope, keeping a vigil for a son the world had declared gone forever. Their love was the anchor of the story, and it was the simple diligence of Dave Markowicz, the construction worker who saw more than just a piece of rusted junk, that ultimately broke the case. He could have tossed the lunchbox aside, but his choice to investigate further was an act of human curiosity and decency that unraveled a generation-old secret. The case had a lasting legacy that rippled far beyond the families involved. In the wake of the revelations, the Niagara Parks Commission, along with the National Park Service in the U.S., implemented sweeping changes to their security protocols. Background checks for all third-party contractors became far more stringent and were required to be renewed annually. They increased surveillance in non-public and service areas, recognizing that the park's hidden corners could be exploited. The Leo Sullivan Law was proposed in New York State, enhancing penalties for kidnapping cases where the victim is concealed through fraudulent adoption. The story served as a powerful, real-world example of a universal truth, that no secret is buried forever, and that truth can be unearthed by the most unlikely of circumstances. It wasn't forensic science or brilliant detective work that solved this mystery in the end. It was a rockslide and a lunchbox. It's a reminder that sometimes justice doesn't come from a methodical investigation, but from a twist of fate. A child lost to the roar of the falls was not claimed by nature, but by human greed, only to be returned by a chance discovery a quarter-century later. This story is a testament to the fact that even in the coldest of cases, a single clue can reignite a flame of hope. If this incredible story struck you, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe for more true crime mysteries that defy explanation. We want to hear from you. Tell us in the comments what you believe is the most shocking part of Leo Sullivan's story.